Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Help for Helpers. And we are so pleased to have Rob Foxcroft with us this morning. We started with Rob wanting to know where everybody is from. And it's so amazing that we're from all these places and here we are together. You wouldn't think that we were so many miles apart. So I've been very much looking forward to this morning and very glad we're beginning.
Mhm. Well, just to begin, it's very lovely to be asked to do this. I want to thank everybody. I think this venture is really Lynn's invention and such a good one. And I particularly want to thank Katerina, Katerina, you are just the best person to deal with about something like this. I feel so gently and competently looked after, and it's quite
Uh,
wonderful. Just as I did when I did the 5 week course for you a few years ago. It was really a model of how to care for somebody who's going to present. So thank you very much. You are
that's beautiful, Rob.
a
Maybe
job.
you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Oh, what is there to say about me?
Yeah.
I this could be very short or very long, but the first really big event in my life, which gives my age away on the most spectacular scale, was the Suez Crisis. Because during the Suez Crisis, a young man came knocking at our door who had knocked on several hundred doors after being thrown out of his student accommodation because of the political situation. Everybody was very hostile to Arabs at that time, and he was from Egypt. And he knocked on our door, and my parents took him in, and he stayed with us for a year and gave me a feeling he was from Cairo. Uh, and he had what I now know is a very typically Muslim thing about um, small children. He was just crazy about little people. So my parents were wonderful parents, but they weren't very good at little people. And Hassan knew how it was done. So for 1 year, I had this wonderful experience of being played with and adored and loved, and then he was gone, and it was the biggest grief of my whole life, I think. It
This,
was only much later that I met people who'd lost important friends in early childhood and not really been old enough to process the grief. And then I slowly began to understand what had happened to me internally when Hassan disappeared from our lives. So in some ways, that's the biggest shaping experience of my life, and I became preoccupied with other cultures and other religions and other backgrounds, and that has shaped a lot of who I am. I uh, disappeared into stories for a long time, and then music came along, and I have been teaching the piano for many years. Um, and one of the nicest thing about teaching the piano is that people come and see you for an extremely long time, and sometimes several members of one family will come. So I have a not very well paid but deeply privileged lifestyle. I don't know what else there is to say. I came into focusing. I met BB Simon in the first evening I was focusing, and BB was a very dear friend for a long time. Not always in the easiest way, I think. In some ways, I became one of her family, and some of the family complexities got caught up in that. But still, she was a very important person. Um, I had just had a big bereavement at the time when I met Dee, and she was very, very supportive in that space where I was really distressed. So focusing has been a home and a place of complexity for me. I think that's all I want to say about myself.
Hmm.
Um, so
I
then,
I love what you said because if Katerina had just read your bio, we wouldn't have known the heart of your journey.
yeah, I think that really is the heart, Lynn.
Hmm.
It's yeah. So yes, this. I was always very allergic to the feeling that we are the Western people and we are sophisticated and we are wise and knowing, and we take our wonderful religion, with to the peasants in other countries. That was very offensive to me. From even as a small child, I had this feeling that that I have this slogan: empathy is the essence of our humanity. And that really what we need to do is to go to other places and see what we can learn from them instead of saying, well, we have these wonderful things and you can learn from us, which seems a bad place to start from. Um, so I wanted to begin with that
Hmm.
it's like my slogan: empathy is the essence of our humanity. And I'll say one more thing there. When I was young and we were in a Christian family, and there were the Gospels, and the best bit in the New Testament is the bit where Jesus is talking to this woman, and he says, "No, I don't preach to you at this stage. You're not part of my racial group, and you're a woman, and why would I talk to you?" And she says, "No, you're wrong. And you should talk to me because even the dogs get to eat the crumbs." And he says, "Do you know, I'm wrong." And it's the only place in the whole of as far as I know, it's the only place in the Jewish or the Christian scriptures where God says, "Yes, I was wrong." And it's a very important thing that the divine can be mistaken. And it's a real sign of the empathy of Jesus that he can say that. Oh, yes, I see where you're coming from. I was mistaken. And if that's good enough there, it's good enough for me. So I wanted to read you a little passage by Joseph Conrad, um, who is he's a central reference for me in the stories and the novels of Conrad. There is very often a character who is the storyteller, and there's a circle of listeners. I think Conrad got this from Emily Bronte because you have this kind of structure in Wuthering Heights, where the man goes to a house and the housekeeper tells him the story. But most of the story she heard. So you get a series of frames, and it's important to each storyteller to tell the story and to be heard and to have a listener or a circle of listeners. And in Conrad, again and again, empathy is what matters to him, what it means to be heard, why it's important to us as human beings to be heard. It's right at the heart of his writing. Um, and that people get to say the truth of what's happened. And every now and then you have a situation where he explores things that can't be said. The Secret Sharer story is all about somebody holding a secret, and very successfully, two people holding a secret and getting away with it. But it's an uncomfortable thing to Conrad that she wouldn't be open. And at the end of Heart of Darkness, his most famous story, there's this massive lie which leaves you exceedingly uncomfortable. You understand perfectly why the narrator has told the lie, but it's really difficult to decide whether he should have told the story as it happened, whether the listener could have stood the truth. But he doesn't give her the chance to hear the truth. So for Conrad, telling the story faithfully and really being heard is central and sometimes full of very difficult tensions. And a lot of his work is about those tensions. So here he says, this is a story, Karain, about some Western sailors listening to a Muslim headman from a local tribe. And he writes, no man will speak to his master, but to a wanderer and a friend, to him who does not come to teach or to rule, to him who asks for nothing and accepts all things. Words are spoken by the campfires, in the shared solitude of the sea, in riverside villages, in resting places surrounded by forests. Words are spoken that take no account of race or color. One heart speaks, another one listens, and the earth, the sea, the passing wind and the stirring leaf hear also the futile tale of the burden of life. I find more and more over the last 10 or 20 years that people in the focusing world, certain people who are important to me, come to focusing from neuroscience. They want a kind of objective reference with which I am personally somewhat uncomfortable. Some of my favorite people come at focusing from neuroscience, but it still leaves me uncomfortable. Well, people come from the social sciences and want a kind of research which is generalized and statistical and can make broad statements about people. And for me, coming from the humanities, that's an uneasy thing. The humanities meaning art and music and literature and stories and poems and dance and the theatre. And all of those are where we go to study what is purely individual, what is never statistical, and is never even in principle predictable. The humanities are the exploration of unique and individual situations. And I think in the world we live in now, there's an enormous pressure to generalize everything, to take a science view rather than a humanities view. And I don't know how it is where you are, but in this country that I'm living in, the funding for the humanities is collapsing day by day, as if looking at individual human beings and their individual lives is no longer valid or important. So when I teach focusing, I very often want to work with a story, or I want to take a group of people to an art gallery, as we did in Cambridge, or I want to play music. and to have that reference to the arts, um, which gives us a way into approaching each situation as individual rather than making broad statements about people. Okay, that's an important value for me to come from the humanities. Even philosophy can be an awkward place to come from if it is a certain kind of philosophical thinking. That really brings us to the main thing, which is what I call meditative conversation. Everybody who loves focusing knows that it's good to have somebody to be with you when you make the inward turn, what Jean Gendlin often use this lovely expression, to make the inward turn. It's good to have somebody who offers you, when you are focusing, the kind of focusing friendly listening, which I like to call meditative listening. And we now have an enormous literature about empathy and listening in those lopsided relationships which are so important in our world, where one person is very definitely the listener and perhaps to some extent a guide, but he's really careful not to bring their own stuff into the relationship, so that the focuser can have a clear and open space to explore something. And we have many people in our community who are extremely gifted and experienced in that kind of listening that gives all the space to the focuser, or almost all the space. It's a puzzle to me that the next thing I say has not been talked about almost at all. We all know that when two focusing people have an ordinary conversation, it tends to become a focusing-oriented conversation. Now, I may be mistaken, but I don't know any papers or articles about this. It's like something we all know that isn't talked about, and I may just be out of the loop or something. But it seems to me that when two focusing people get together, you get little moments of inward turning all over the place. Continual pausing and waiting and little silences. And the whole conversation gets to be illuminated by a pervasive focusing sensitivity. Well, you can call that whatever you like. I call it meditative conversation, but that's only a name. That's just jargon. I remember Jean saying, if you don't use my funny jargon, he said, you'll need some funny jargon of your own. But it doesn't matter what funny jargon we use. It was very funny when he said it, and we all laughed. So meditative conversation is just a name, but it seems to me an important thing to not just to practice, but to talk about a little more than I'm aware that we have done. So when two focusing people get together and there's this kind of conversation where each of the people falls silent and the other person makes space for the silence, and so you get a kind of creative renewing out of the felt sense and not just social chatter. In that kind of meditative conversation, there are at any point 4 things which you might want to do. The first thing is you might want to take in the overall feeling and the detailed content of what the other person is saying. The second thing is you might want to say something back which will enable you to be sure that you understood what was said in just the way that it was meant. And then the third thing is you yourself might want to turn inwards, noticing a sense of meaning forming in your own body. And fourthly, you might even want to say something from your inward sense of meaning. So there are the two aspects of listening to the other person, taking in what they say and maybe checking that you understood it. And there are the two aspects of being the speaker or the focuser for the next few moments, where you make the inward turn and notice what's forming in you, and perhaps you say something from that sense of meaning. So that's really all I want to say, and we could break up and explore it in pairs, perhaps. Just by way of summary, Jean once said to me, when you feel heard, when you're focusing or talking to somebody and you feel heard, there has then to be a silence, because that bit is now done. And the next bit hasn't got here yet. If you really feel, yes, you got me, then you come to a kind of halt, because the next thing hasn't come yet. So in the meantime, there can only be a silence. And I went away from that, and after a while I wrote a quatrain, a 4-line poem. When you feel heard, a silence falls. In that silence, more may come. Often it is something deeper. You can feel it just now forming at the edge of being. Okay, that's me. Oh, more people have appeared. I was looking at my notes so I didn't see you arrive.
That was so beautiful, Rob. And I wonder if you might just say those guidelines again for us, for the new people. And I'm very excited about this meditative conversation, because we've been sort of practicing focusing conversation in these groups. And it's some fresh air for that wonderful new sort of blossoming of focusing in groups. I wonder if we could practice the meditative conversation with the whole group for a few minutes before going into the breakout rooms, or do you think it would be better to do that after?
My instinct is to do that after.
Yeah.
It's in a group where everybody is in the same physical space. And I'm not knocking Zoom. It's very wonderful that we can do this. There are many things I don't like about the modern world and the internet, but that we can meet from all over the world on Zoom and all be together is just wonderful. But it's a tricky space to do this in, compared
Mm.
to in a physical space together. And we're quite a lot of people to do this. So I think we should probably
Mhm.
repeat the 4 things just one more time,
Mhm.
and then go off in pairs and think about focusing meditative conversation together. So
Great, great. And how long would you like the breakout room to be?
I don't know. I think You are
Maybe 20 minutes.
let's make it half an hour. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm I don't do a lot of running groups, and I'm not very good at it. I don't have a good sense of these things. I'm much more natural one-to-one than in a group of people. Um, but I think we'll need half an hour.
That sounds good.
Okay, let me say the four things one more time. That as as a listening person, oh, Katerina's put it in there. Here you are. I feel so looked after. Katerina's put it in the chat, so you've got it in writing. But as a listening person, you might want just to really take in what the other person is saying, and to inhibit the natural human response to think about what you want to say. Just so that's the first thing. And then you might want to say something back, and I'm very much of the Carl Rogers camp on this. The purpose of saying something back is to check that you actually heard what somebody said in the way that they meant it, and not in some slightly distorted form of your own. And then, as also a participant in the conversation, you might want to turn inwards and say, hey, I've got something here. Something stirring in me. What Jean used to call the inward turn. That lovely phrase. Such a simple phrase, but so nice. And then you might want to say something from that place. It doesn't always want you to say something. Sometimes you just notice something for yourself. But if it's to be a conversation, you will want to say things from yourself as well as hearing things from the other person. So those are the four pieces. And then how do we set about forming pairs? What do you usually do?
Well, Christine will put us in pairs.
I think Liz wants to ask something or say something.
As a catalyst, someone who remains neutral and just potentiates what's happening with you, or this is always on my mind. You're with a person and not just any person, that person, and you're having all kinds of reactions to being with that person. Is that a safe person? What can I say to that person? What can't I say to that person?
Yes.
Is there any way that you can speak to that?
I think this is such an important thing. Jean Lynn used sometimes to say, you just need a listener. Anybody will do. And something in me used to scream when he said that, because for me, that is just so not true. Any person just won't do. The things I can say to one person are quite different from what I can say to another person and feel safe in myself. Or feel it's like the things that need to be said fully and the things that can be said in shorthand are different with each person. I was talking one day, I often think of this. I was talking one day to a very wonderful person who lives near me here. And I just said, it's like the watcher on the roof. And then I thought, Rob, you're being a complete idiot. How could anybody know what you mean? And I said, do you know? And she said, yes, of course, don't be stupid. Because she immediately knew that I was talking about the opening of the Oresteia of Aeschylus, where the guy is on the roof waiting for the flares from Troy. And I didn't know when I said it that I'd taken in who she was. But it was just she had the complete feeling of the play in her mind from her acting background. And now to somebody else I would have needed to say much more. but the don't be stupid that she gave me was just so warm and so understanding, and I knew I didn't have to say anything else. Where to anybody else I know, it would have needed much more said. And so there's a safety in knowing somebody will understand a complexity that you have. And there are other kinds of safety in knowing that people won't judge or criticize or have too much back to say, you know? And I think you've more there, Liz, from your face. There's something else you want. Is there more there?
Well, just that it's not neutral to be assigned randomly,
Mm-hmm.
because some people we know already, some people we've had relationships with of various kinds. There are some times where someone here has been our therapist. Sometimes someone here has been our client. So, so
Yeah.
there's always an anxiety about this kind of supposed random assignment to pairs
But how do you usually do this? Did
like
you?
this, and we have all kinds of feelings that we probably don't talk about unless we feel safe. I'm just bringing it out there.
I think you aren't giving us a problem to solve. You're just flagging up one of the dimensions of this task. And then there's a lot maybe that comes even before either person says anything, of taking each other in and sort of feeling who that person is, and the felt sense of where you can meet that person. And we have that felt sense
Yes.
the other
Exactly.
always, with the man in the dry cleaning store, or the teacher of your kid, or whatever you feel, where you could meet there.
Yes.
So I will see you all back in a half an hour.
Oh, you all seem to be back. Yes, nice to be home. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had as productive and meaningful a time as I did with my partner. It was very wonderful. So
Usually, Rob, we ask people what they want to tell us from their experience in the breakout room. Would you like
yeah,
us to
let's
or
that.
yeah, you like that?
Do that.
Sort of make a link between the two worlds, the dyadic world and the group world.
What does anybody want to share or to say or to reflect upon at this point?
Mm, Hi, Rob Foxcroft. I'm Shashi Jain. You said that your experience in the group was wonderful. You said, right?
And just now in the breakout bit.
Yes. Would you define that? What was it that was wonderful to
Oh,
you?
every now and then you meet somebody, I guess this is true for all of us, and you feel as if you've known each other forever or something. It's like this is a new person, but it's like talking to a very old friend. And how did that happen? And it goes with a kind of confidence that if we met again in 10 years, we would still feel like old friends. It was just very immediately tender and safe and intimate and comfortable. And yeah, it was a very special half hour I just had, and I hadn't anticipated it. And we found this flow of the meditative conversation very immediately. So it was lovely.
Can I ask you one more question, Rob?
Yes, who's speaking? I can't find you.
That's Sashi.
Okay, go on. Oh, there you are.
Yes, there she is.
What happens when you have the intention of joining somebody in meditative practice, but that person is full of anger or full of their own angst of some kind, and you are there as a listener? What do you do?
Do you have a particular person in mind?
No.
Just as a general thing. I don't like dealing with anger, to be honest, but I mean, clearly we all have to sometimes. In general, I think you just have to accept that when people are full of something that is definitely not a felt sense, but a gut feeling, you just have to make space for it, at least for a little while. And usually, if you can really hear where the person is, then you get into a space that's got more meaning and less mere emotion in it quite quickly. But sometimes you don't. It takes a little while. I mean, there are the two things. One is that the anger or the distress is at me personally, which is much more difficult. And the other is that it's what they're carrying and bring with them. And mostly, if it's what they're carrying and bring with them, then that's reasonably comfortable. I can deal with that and just try to really hear where the person is. Whereas if it's at me, then I have to work a lot harder to be okay, and to really hear it, and take a little time to hear the other person before I get my stuff out.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to comment on that. And maybe this is Laura Reed. Maybe this is moving into the territory of how to deal with anger. But I think when somebody's angry and and they're wanting to have a conversation with me, I need to do that turn inward to see how it feels in me, and to kind of get the right distance from their anger, where I'm not, in the soup, and also to make the choice of whether I want to be open to that energy.
You have to make an inward turn and find out where you stand in relation to this person's anger. That's the first thing to do. Is that right?
Yes, thank you. That's well put. And the second piece is, do I want to hear it or not? I mean, am I willing to be in presence of this? I mean, we have an exercise to do, so it's sort of like, well, we're supposed to be doing the exercise, but in general, in life,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and sometimes it's easier to not get involved than other times.
Yes, but I guess I'm thinking, in the States, right now, I don't know how it is in other places, but it becomes socially acceptable to be angry and to bring a lot of that energy to our interactions. And um, it feels like I have the choice. I don't owe the person a listening.
Mm. So,
Ver-
so you make a choice and then you have to say something. So what do? Do you say, I can see you've a lot of angry energy, but I don't have time, I don't have space for that just now, or what do you do?
Lori Rappaport said this once, which I thought was very wise. She said, "You can say almost anything if you say it from your felt sense."
Hmm.
Yeah,
So, what I would say in that situation would be from my felt sense.
and mostly that will work for you in practice.
Um, it's always a safe place for me to go and feel, what is it like to be standing here in this interaction? What is my felt sense? And actually, compared to my default historical thing, which is try to shut the person down when they're angry,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in touch with how it is for me, at the same time I'm listening to them, there's sort of like two tracks going on. Um, it works better for them.
Yes. Okay. I have one thought about angry, if you want it, Laura. It made an enormous difference to me to hear Marshall Rosenberg say, angry is not a feeling. Angry is what you feel when you can't stand to feel what you're feeling. It was like that changed the world for me. So when somebody comes along with angry, I'm always now saying, what is it that they can't stand to feel that they're feeling? Because if you can catch that, usually the anger just disappears in smoke. It just blows away. Um, and there are people here I know who know a great deal more about Marshall's perspective on relationships than I do. But that does seem a deep fundamental thing to me, that anger's not really part of the family of emotions in the way that sad is. It's almost like a presentation or something.
Excuse me, everybody. This is BJ. First, thank you, golly, Rob, for bringing up something from Marshall that always makes my heart open. And the comments on anger, Laura. Thank you. And it sounds like you were deciding to be accountable to yourself when you decide, am I going to be here? But before all of that, Sashi, I'm curious, were you asking a question about anger specifically, or were you asking about just in general, if you come together for this meditative thing, but something totally different is on the other person's mind? Sashi, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And yes, mine was not specifically um, dealing with that, the anger, but many other, that you are on this page and they are on that page. And you know that meditative practice is like two people coming together to, I visualize and feel like this is an arena where two humans are going to get together and they're going to have tete-a-tete and get to know each other's heart or something like that, or you know, or help them to know their own heart, or some kind of presupposition of some cooperative endeavor, you know.
Mm.
But what if you come when the other person is on a different page, and you know they're not willing to, they're stuck in their own whatever, their attic or something like that, of thoughts that they don't shift that easily. So what do? You have to have tolerance, you have to have patience. How do you learn that language they're saying? How do you? Yeah, so it wasn't just meant for anger, But, how do you come to the opposing if you're not, both of you are in a meditative mode, or what do you do?
Sashi, I heard you say you have to have tolerance, you have to have patience. Are those the kinds of things you've tried in the past?
I I guess I do to some extent, yes.
I I think that question, Sashi, is the great big question of humanity. How if you have need and expectation of one kind of relating, and the other person or the other people don't, and they're filled with something else, how do you come together? That's our big challenge, that we're seeing what practices can help us with that.
It seems to me that listening to the person who's angry and getting the overall feeling, but also, really what they're saying, and check in with them, these steps here. But often underneath anger is hurt and pain. And often if we listen to that anger, we can help them to share what's underneath it, and the hurt and the anger, I think. I mean, the hurt and the pain that may be underneath the anger, at least in some situations.
Let me say a word here. There's that brilliant distinction that this is Charles. Hi, Rob. I
Yeah.
don't know if you okay. This made between pouring out, which when people are angry, they're often pouring out, and you're just there for almost an object that they're pouring out to, and then needing to pour out to somebody or something. And then there's the ways in which we sometimes try to fit in and become how we think the other person wants us to be, as opposed to how we truly are. And then there's relating, which she identified as kind of something new. I don't know if it's entirely new, but it's certainly wonderful that when we're listening in the way that you were describing earlier, Rob, that's relating. That would be what Jean would call, I think, when we're relating to each other. And how do you get from, there's some interest, I guess we're having a discussion of how we get from somebody pouring out to relating, where we're engaged in a kind of meditative conversation where we are hearing and reflecting and going inward. How do we create that shift? And it's a tremendously important question, as Lynn is pointing out, particularly in the climate in which we're in, when there's so much pouring out and not so much listening and relating. I think you're bringing in something very precious here with Rob in terms of pointing to that, and how can we make that better known as a way that people can converse, sometimes at very different poles, politically, socially, religious. It doesn't matter, because if we're relating from our heart, and we have a common humanity there. That's what Marshall, I think, was pointing to constantly. Yeah.
I was relating what you said, Charles, to what somebody said, Lori said, about when you come from your felt sense, it usually will work. And I was thinking about, rather than going through the motions of listening, if I'm with someone who's pouring out and I'm wanting a meditative focusing conversation, if I go inside and I say, oh, I was expecting that we were going to have this meditative conversation, and I see you're in a very different place, and let me just come and be and settle and be with you as you are. Let's see what that brings to me. And you brought your own response into it in a focusing way. I think that sometimes helps me.
Mm-hmm.
To know about these categories, if they have to be categories, that there was a little discussion before with Laura and others that if you find that the person is angry, as if that's a thing that needs special, that it's not just part of being alive, it has to be handled. And which is different from making a distinction between pouring out and another kind of behavior about whatever it is that you're feeling. But I would like to feel that whether you call it focusing or focusing conversation or meditative focusing, you can still bring whatever to it.
Liz, what do you mean by being handled? Do you mean like that you have your own feelings and reactions, and so therefore you have to manage in relationship with the other person, or
That was just a feeling that I was getting from part of the conversation before, in the sense of what do you do if somebody comes to a session angry, as if that's something that's a thing, as opposed to, you wouldn't ask the question, what do you do if your focusing partner comes to the conversation in a good mood, eager to speak to you? That's background. It became foreground of somebody's angry, something that needs to be discussed. And I did get that feeling of managing. How do you manage this angry person?
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
I'm really glad that you just spoke last, Liz, because I think what I wanted to add, in part, is informed by something you said earlier on in the first half of our meeting. And I was thinking, that are in the kind of foreground of our awareness, or many of us, or at least the kind of intention is, oh, we're going to be in this breakout room together, and we're going to enjoy being together, and we're both going to be on the same page. When in fact, what could happen is you arrive in that breakout room and the person's like, oh no, not you. My client, my therapist, whoever, and the kind of, when I was feeling into that, I was kind of wondering about how, of course, that can be a real jolt. It can be very jarring. It can be the very opposite of what we imagined it would be. But I'm wondering, a bit like perhaps seeing a lovely big fluffy dog and thinking, oh, how lovely, there's a big fluffy dog here. And then you go towards it and it growls at you. It's like, how can we, I guess in a way, how can we ground ourselves when the experience that we find ourselves in is different than the one we imagined we'd find ourselves in? And how can we kind of experience ourselves and the other as perhaps sort of two wild animals or something who are now feeling really uncomfortable with each other, and can we be with that experience and perhaps not try to change it?
There's an inherent idealism in the focusing world.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say a little more, Liz? That sounds very important.
So,
That we have to be a certain way, or we should be, you mean idealism that we should be a certain way
that
with
it's
each
going to
other?
be happy, or it's going to be, that it's fundamentally good, or if you do it right, and a certain bias slant toward will come together and
I'm
things will be good.
I'm aware of the time.
Yes, and we do have Rob Foxcroft has brought a poem for us to reflect on.
I just want to respond to you very quickly, Liz, because I didn't want to leave you with that thought. I mean, there is an inherent idealism in focusing and in meditation, and and we all have lots of different ideals. And I think being able to be easy with anger or any emotion is part of the ideals, but sometimes not expected in meditation. But I didn't want to leave you with that. I don't think what I said was very helpful, but just to mark that you're protesting the idealism, or at least wanting it to be open.
Be open.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rob, I have a request. Can you repeat this, please, this quote by Marshall Rosenberg about anger?
Yes, I hope I have it correct or correct enough. I think Marshall said, anger is not a feeling. Anger is what you feel when you can't stand to feel what you're feeling. And
Thank you.
That's just been a touchstone for me. It's just been so helpful on many occasions. And
it's a very practical idea.
It's a very practical idea. It's really practical.
Yeah. Very applicable to focusing, to dealing with anger. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to say quickly, Rob, thank you. You something about the way you wear, and you talked about, you created a climate of, in our breakout room was very deep, and I think it's the deepest way I have ever been in a breakout room. So
say that back. That was the deepest way it's ever been for you in a breakout room.
yes,
That's
yes.
a big moment.
A big moment, and I wanted to say thank you, and would love to also be in conversation about what is it that was there, what was the fabric of that created even the conversation we had about anger, like, or that there is a bias about focusing, all of this that are hard to bring up. And that we can really have it here. We can be in conversation with it, an unfinished conversation. So thank you for this.
Somehow between us, we found a space that could go really very deep for you.
Yes, there was depth in the breakout room, and I feel like there was some depth in the larger room about difficult aspects of living. Thank you. And thank you. I want to say thank you.
Okay. Well, if I did something, you're very welcome.
I just want to ditto Sophie that who you are or how you are feels like a great blessing today. And I'm so grateful for your presentation and sharing. It did create something very special. I love a meditative conversation. I remember when we used to separate, when we were first in training, we'd say, oh no, we're not focusing, we're just having a conversation. And there was this division between focusing and conversation. And you put it together, and something in me today went, oh yeah, of course, it was always that. And it wasn't something separate. So Thank you. I'm very grateful for today.
That's good. Thank you.
I am also very grateful for today.
Well,
I hope Rob gets a chance to read his poem.
Yes.
yeah, come on. Maybe we're running out of time, so I could just circulate the poem.
No.
No, read it.
Please read it.
Okay, I'll have to work out how to get to it. This is a poem by Edwin Muir, who came from the Orkney Islands. And I've put here, his work did more than anything to keep me whole in the dreadful early years when hope was fragile. So Muir was very important to me, and I think he's one of the great poets. And this poem just seems so appropriate at the present time when the world is plunging into trouble by the day. It's called Reading in Wartime. Boswell by my bed, Tolstoy on my table. Though the world has bled for 4.5 years, and wives and mothers' tears collected would be able to water a little field untouched by anger and blood, a penitential yield somewhere in the world. Though in each latitude armies like forests fall, the iniquitous and the good, head over heels hurled and confusion over all. Boswell's turbulent friend and his deafening verbal strife, Ivan Ilyitch's death. Tell me more about life, the meaning and the end of our familiar breath, both being personal than all the carnage can. Retrieve the shape of man, lost and anonymous. Tell me wherever I look that not one soul can die of this or any clan who is not one of us, and has a personal tie, perhaps to someone now searching an ancient book, folktale, or country song in many and many a tongue, to find the original face, the individual soul, the eye, the lip, the brow, forever gone from their place, and gather an image whole.
That poem really touches depths.
Thank
That poem
you.
touches depths. Thank you.
I'm glad you liked it.
Well, thank you very, very much, Rob. And I hope you come back again. And,
Thank you very, very much, everybody. That was very meaningful for me and lovely to meet you all. Both the people I know already and the people who are new to me. It was just great.
We'll see you next week, everybody.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye now.
Thank you, everybody.
A bientôt.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.